Hi, I'm Marin. I let my sister stay in my apartment, just for a little while. But then her boyfriend moved in. He changed the locks. He made house rules. For me. I came home one day and my name wasn't on anything anymore. Not the door, not the bills, not even the truth. They threw parties, trashed my furniture, sold things that mattered to me, and then told everyone I was the problem. You ever wonder how far family will go when they assume you'll never fight back? Well, I stopped knocking. Want to know what happened next? Sunday afternoons used to mean something. A hot mug of Earl Grey, my feet tucked under a throw blanket, and a rerun of some cooking show humming in the background. Nothing urgent, nothing loud. That afternoon was no different. Or at least it wasn't supposed to be. Then my phone buzzed. Mom. I didn't answer immediately. Her calls often came packaged with a side of emotional sabotage, and right on cue, when I finally picked up, she didn't waste a second. Hi, sweetheart. How's my hardworking girl? That sugary tone, too sweet to be casual, too practiced to be sincere, set off alarm bells. I'm good, Mom. Just relaxing. What's up? There was a pause, just long enough to signal a pivot. Well, your sister's going through a rough patch. And there it was. She just needs a little help. Her lease ended unexpectedly, and she doesn't have the funds to move into a new place right away. I let her words hang in the air. The apartment. She meant the old one, the one I fought to keep after the divorce. She has nowhere to go, Marin, and you have that place just sitting there. I closed my eyes, already knowing how this conversation would end. I wanted to say no. I wanted to protect my peace, my property, my boundaries. But saying no to Mom meant months of passive-aggressive jabs during family dinners. I need it rented, I said slowly. That income offsets my mortgage. I know, honey, I do. But you're doing well now. You've got your new place, your job. You've bounced back. That last part cut deeper than she realized. I bounced back because I had that apartment to fall on, I muttered. That wasn't luck. That was survival. So help your sister survive, she said simply, like I hadn't just explained that exact thing. I could already hear her retelling this to my aunts like a martyr. All I asked was a favor. Fine, I finally breathed. She can stay there, temporarily. Thank you, sweetheart. You're an angel. She hung up before I could tack on any conditions. A week passed before I saw Sorrel. She showed up at the apartment 10 minutes late with a pair of oversized sunglasses and a venti iced latte in hand, like she was on her way to a beach shoot. Hey, she chirped. Thanks again, sis. Seriously. Her hug was quick, borderline performative. I unlocked the apartment and let her in. The space looked the same. Neutral paint, basic furniture I'd left behind, a faint trace of lavender from the diffuser I'd set up last month. I've only got a few bags, she said, hauling in far more than a few. Oh, and Knox might swing by here and there. I turned to her. Knox? She shrugged. My boyfriend. He's helping me move stuff. Don't worry, he's chill. That wasn't what I asked. I cleared my throat. Look, a few ground rules, okay? No overnight guests, no parties, don't move furniture, and if you want to do anything major, just call me first. She waved her hand. Totally fair. It wasn't reassurance. It was dismissal wrapped in a smile. 2 days later, I stopped by to drop off her insurance paperwork. She hadn't answered my texts, and I figured she was out. I still had my key, so I let myself in. The door creaked open into something off. Music played softly in the background. Indie rock, something with a lazy beat. And there, lounging on the couch like it was his personal throne, was a man I'd never seen before. He looked up, completely unfazed. You're Marin? I stood frozen in the doorway. Knox, he added, pointing to himself with 2 fingers, like he expected a gold star. Sorrel told me you were intense. I blinked. Sorry, who are you? I finally asked, even though I already knew. Her boyfriend. We've kind of been staying here. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I was too stunned to respond. I turned on my heel and walked back to the hallway, dialing Sorrel. She answered on the 3rd ring, bubbly as ever. Hey, sis. Is Knox living in my apartment? There was a pause. Well, he's just crashing a few nights a week. You said temporary, right? That was for you. Another pause. It's not a big deal, she said breezily. Don't blow this up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even argue. I just hung up. That night, I sat in my kitchen spooning cereal into my mouth while scrolling through rental listings. Not for her, for myself. I wasn't leaving my home, but I needed to remind myself what boundaries looked like. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed, "Funny how being nice makes people forget it's still your place." I stared at the blinking cursor for a few seconds, then typed another line. "Tomorrow, I'll drop by again. This time, I'll knock like a stranger. Let's see if they open the door." The sky was heavy that morning, a solid stretch of gray clouds hanging low over Portland like a warning. I pulled into the apartment parking lot with a container of pumpkin muffins and a sense of unease that hadn't left me since my last visit. There was no real reason for the muffins. I think part of me hoped that some homemade gesture would soften what I already suspected was going to be an awkward interaction. I climbed the familiar stairwell, balancing the tray in one hand and my purse in the other, and stopped in front of the door. I knocked once, firm but polite. No answer. I tried the key. It didn't turn. Confused, I pulled it out, checked the number again as if I'd somehow wandered to the wrong unit, then tried a second time. Same result. Completely jammed. I knocked again, this time louder. Footsteps shuffled inside. The door opened a crack, and there he was. Knox, barefoot, shirtless, and absolutely unbothered. "Oh, hey," he said, like I was a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. "Didn't know you were coming by. We changed the locks last week." I blinked. "You did what?" He opened the door wider, leaned casually against the frame. "Yeah, just didn't feel safe with all the foot traffic, you know?" "This is my apartment," I said, my voice low but firm. Knox tilted his head, as if I'd just spoken in Morse code. "Sure, technically, but we're living here now, so we figured it made sense." "We?" He gave me a smug smile. "Yeah, Sorrel and I talked about it. It's about safety and boundaries. Look, I actually wrote up some ground rules to keep things smooth." He disappeared inside before I could respond. I stood frozen, one hand still clutching the tray of muffins like a peace offering in a war that had just been declared. When he returned, he handed me a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. "It's just so we all feel safe and respected here," he said, as if that somehow justified what he'd done. I unfolded the paper slowly. My eyes scanned the list. Visits require 72 hours notice, no entry after 7 p.m., no discussions about bills or payments, no surprise inspections. Emotional tone must remain calm and respectful. I read it again, stunned at the audacity. Emotional tone? This man who just changed my locks without permission wanted to police my emotional tone? My fingers clenched the paper tightly, but I didn't let it tear. "Where's Sorrel?" I asked, my voice measured. "She's resting," he said, stepping back inside. "Want me to pass a message?" I didn't answer. I just stared at him until the door closed in my face. The hallway smelled like sandalwood incense and burnt toast. It used to smell like fresh paint and lavender when I lived there. I turned around, walked back down the stairs, and headed straight for my car. Once inside, I placed the muffins on the passenger seat, started the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even curse, although every cell in my body begged me to. Instead, I drove. Not home, not yet. I needed movement, a loop around the city, a distraction from the betrayal that had just sunk its claws deeper than I expected. By the time I got back to my place, it was dusk, and the air had turned colder. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes you feel like winter's already moved in. I took the paper out of my coat pocket and laid it on the kitchen table under the overhead light. I highlighted each rule in red marker like I was grading an unearned term paper. I stared at the words until the letters blurred, then snapped a photo and saved it to a folder I labeled Legal Proof. That night, I didn't watch TV. I didn't call Mom. I didn't journal. I opened my laptop, created a new Word document, and titled it Occupancy Agreement Emergency Termination Draft. I typed for an hour straight, bullet points, citations, references to Oregon tenant law. I even attached a PDF of the property deed with my name clearly printed in bold. And then I stopped. I read the entire document from start to finish, let out a slow exhale, and dragged my mouse to the trash icon. Deleted. Not yet. Not like this. They needed to feel it, not in a legal envelope, not in court, not even in a shouted argument. They needed to feel the shift. That moment when the person they underestimated chooses silence, not submission. I poured a glass of wine, sat back in my chair, and stared out the window. I'd given them time. I'd given them shelter. I'd given them the benefit of the doubt. Now, I was going to give them consequences. The rain started just before dawn, a quiet tapping against the windows that reminded me of everything I hadn't said yet. Portland always knew how to set a mood. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the cursor blinking over my banking portal. Just routine, I told myself. Pay the mortgage, check utilities, move on. But something didn't look right. The electric bill was nearly double. I blinked and refreshed the page. Still the same. Water usage spiked, the Wi-Fi plan somehow upgraded. I hadn't touched the account. I picked up my phone and sent Sorrel a text. Hey, have you noticed the utilities? They're way higher this month. She responded 10 minutes later. Oh, yeah, Knox said the heater's been glitchy. Maybe that's it? That's it? I wasn't buying it. Knox couldn't fix a flat tire, let alone diagnose HVAC issues. And why would a broken heater cause the Wi-Fi to triple? A chill passed over me. Not from the rain or the air, but from something sharper. Suspicion. That afternoon I stepped out for groceries but ended up circling back toward the old apartment. I hadn't planned on it. I just found myself taking a left where I usually turned right. The street was quiet, a little too quiet for mid-afternoon. The blinds were drawn, the porch light on in broad daylight. It looked occupied. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. I just stared up at the mailbox built into the wall near the stairs. I'd set up forwarding for all my mail when I moved, but sometimes institutions still sent things to my old address, out of habit or laziness. Later that evening, after putting away groceries and trying, and failing, to focus on a work report, I logged into my bank's customer service chat. Can you confirm where my last 2 statements were mailed? The agent typed. Yes, last 2 paper statements were sent to old apartment address. Delivered last Thursday. Delivered, but not received. I hung up and called Sorrel. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. The next morning, I drove back. This time I brought coffee, decoy hospitality. Knox opened the door again, wearing a t-shirt with a cartoon skull and plaid pajama pants. Morning, he mumbled. I gave him a tight smile. Have you seen any mail for me? Bank statements? They should have come last week. He shrugged. We tossed junk mail. Didn't see anything with your name on it. I looked past him into the living room. Packages, envelopes, and flyers were scattered across the table like confetti. Can I just take a look myself? He stepped forward, blocking the entrance. I'd rather not. Sorrel's asleep. You get it, right? Right. I turned back toward the stairs without another word. On the way down, my jaw tightened so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I didn't even glance at my car until I was sitting inside it, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. I'd warned her. 2 months earlier, we were at Mom and Dad's for dinner. Sorrel had pulled a face when I asked her not to mess with mail sent to the old place. It's not just junk, I told her. It's not just paper. It's linked to my identity, my accounts. She'd laughed, wine glass in hand. Okay, boss lady, chill. I should have known then. The red flags weren't subtle. They were practically waving in slow motion. Back home, I opened a fresh folder on my desktop and labeled it Violation Log, Apartment B. I started typing. Unauthorized lock change, unauthorized occupant, mail interference, utility spike, account tampering. The list went on. I paused halfway through, ran my fingers through my hair, and picked up my phone again. I need access to the mailbox next time I visit, I texted. No reply. A full hour passed. Then 2, nothing. She was online, her little green status dot glowing like mockery, but apparently silent. That evening I made dinner and tried to pretend the roast chicken meant something comforting, something stable, but all I could think about was the envelope I hadn't received, the bills they weren't paying, the locks I didn't own anymore. Later that night, I left a sticky note on my fridge. When you take back what's yours, do it without shaking. I folded the utility bills and tucked them into a red file folder. My fingers trembled, but I steadied them, opened my vanity drawer, and applied lipstick with the precision of a woman preparing for war. Looking at my reflection, I whispered, "Next visit, I'm not knocking." Saturday rolled in with the kind of wind that rattled the gutters and sent brittle leaves scraping along the sidewalk like they were trying to flee something. I had just poured a cup of chamomile tea when my phone rang. Caller ID, Mrs. Varela. The older woman from across the hall at the old apartment wasn't someone who called unless something was wrong. I put the mug down and answered. "I'm sorry to bother you, dear," she said, her voice thin and cautious. "But there's been a lot of noise coming from your unit, almost every night this week. Loud music, many people coming and going, very late. It's not like before." My stomach twisted. "I'm really sorry, Mrs. Varela," I said. "I'll take care of it." I stood by the window, staring out at the bare branches trembling against the gray sky. How many nights had I spent rationalizing, holding back, giving them another chance? Tonight was different. I changed out of my loungewear, threw on a jacket, and grabbed my bag. On the drive over, my grip on the steering wheel tightened with each turn. I didn't listen to music, didn't check messages. I didn't even rehearse what I would say. By the time I parked in front of the building, the sun had completely sunk. From the outside, I could already hear the bass, low, relentless, pulsing through the walls like a heartbeat, the kind of sound you feel in your chest before you hear it in your ears. The hallway smelled like beer, weed, and something burnt. I knocked on the door once. No answer. I tried the key. Still nothing. The lock they'd changed hadn't been for security. It was to keep me out. I knocked again, louder this time. A few moments later, the door cracked open. A girl I'd never seen before peeked out, chewing gum, her mascara slightly smudged. She tilted her head and smirked. "Oh, are you the landlady?" she asked, like she already knew. Before I could respond, Knox appeared behind her, red plastic cup in hand, wearing an oversized hoodie like this was a college dorm party. "Hey, Marin," he said, grinning like nothing was wrong. "Sorry, little get-together. We kept it small." I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside without waiting for permission. The air reeked of stale alcohol and cheap cologne. My antique side table, one I'd inherited from my grandmother, had beer cans stacked on it like it was a recycling station. People were slouched on the couch, on the floor, even on the windowsill. Someone had spilled something sticky near the kitchen, and the wood looked warped. I scanned the faces and didn't recognize a single one. "I want everyone out. Now!" I said, not yelling, just clear. Sorrel emerged from the back, barefoot and holding a wine glass. Her cheeks were flushed, and her expression somewhere between annoyance and amusement. "Seriously?" she said, rolling her eyes. "You could have at least sent a text." I stared at her. I shouldn't need an invitation to walk into my own apartment. Knox stepped between us, arms slightly raised. "Relax, it's just one night." I looked him dead in the eye. It's been one night every night, apparently. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I turned to the strangers. "Party's over, now." A few people stood awkwardly. One guy muttered something under his breath as he passed me, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to reclaim. Sorrel set her glass down with unnecessary force. "You always have to make everything so dramatic." "No," I said. "I make things clear. That's different." She scoffed. "God, you sound like Mom." That hit harder than she knew, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing it. As the apartment emptied, I did a final sweep. My bookshelf had been rearranged. My lamp had a crack near the base. The rug I'd chosen so carefully now had dark stains near the edges. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back at her when I walked out. "Next time," I said, loud enough for them both to hear, "I won't be this polite." By the time I got back to my car, the night had turned colder. The wind pushed against me like it, too, was tired of being ignored. As I unlocked the driver's side door, my phone buzzed. A message from Sorrel. "You're making this a lot harder than it has to be." I stared at it. Then, with a calm I didn't feel, I unlocked my phone, opened my email, and clicked Compose. Subject: Notice of lease violation informal. I hit send on the email, leaned back in my chair, and waited for the screen to feel less like a battlefield. It didn't. The subject line glared back at me like a warning flare. Notice of lease violation informal. I wasn't playing games anymore, and I wasn't going to let anyone else rewrite the rules. By the time Saturday dinner came around, I was still fuming, but I showed up. Dad grilled as usual, humming to a Sinatra tune from his tinny Bluetooth speaker, while Mom moved in and out of the kitchen with serving bowls like it was just another family meal. I helped out, trying to keep my face neutral, sipping on club soda and counting the minutes until I could leave. Sorrel didn't come. Apparently too tired, Mom said, then followed it up with a tight smile and, "You two really need to talk." I didn't answer. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. Small talk about weather, traffic, Mom's new succulents that were thriving in this moody Portland rain. The roast was slightly overcooked. The mashed potatoes were underseasoned, but that wasn't what made it hard to swallow. Dessert came, pecan pie, and while we passed plates, Mom struck. Like she'd been waiting for the exact moment my guard was lowest. "Sweetie," she began, using that voice she reserves for requests she knows won't go over well. "If you're not really using the apartment anymore, maybe it's time to, put Sorrel's name on it, just for simplicity." The room went silent. I set my fork down slowly. "Excuse me?" Mom smoothed her napkin in her lap, pretending not to notice my reaction. "Well, it would give her some stability. She's been through a lot too. You've already got your place now. You've moved on." My gaze darted to Dad. He didn't meet my eyes. He shifted in his seat, suddenly fascinated by his empty coffee mug. "Moved on," I echoed. "Because I bought a place with my own credit? Paid every dime without help? That's what moving on looks like?" She sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "You're doing so well, and Sorrel's still figuring things out. You've always been the grounded one. You could help her feel that too." I stared at her. It felt like looking at someone I didn't recognize. "That apartment isn't just extra space," I said. "It's how I survived. When Mark walked out, and I was drowning in legal fees and paperwork and loneliness, that apartment was the one thing I had left that he didn't take." She pressed her lips together. "Yes, but that was 2 years ago, Marin. And it still matters." Dad finally spoke, voice low. "Maybe. It wouldn't be the worst thing, if it helps the family." I laughed, just once, sharp and bitter. "Of course, there it is. The family card." Flashbacks hit me in waves. Every time Sorrel flaked out and I covered for her. Every chore I did growing up while she got one more chance. Every pat on the back she got for mediocrity while I had to break myself for a nod. "You know what this feels like?" I asked, looking between them. "It feels like a transaction, like every favor I've ever given just got an invisible price tag stuck on it." Mom reached across the table, palm up. "We're not attacking you. You're being very defensive." I didn't take her hand. "I'm being consistent," I said. "For once in my life, I'm not bending. Not for guilt, not for comfort, not for someone else's convenience." I stood, placing my napkin gently on my plate. "I will not give up that apartment. Not now. Not ever. It's mine. Legally, emotionally, all of it." Mom looked wounded. Dad just looked old. I didn't wait for them to speak. I walked out, coat still draped over the chair. The drizzle had started up again, cold and unrelenting, as I got into my car and closed the door behind me like a vault. The silence inside felt heavier than it should have. Back home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at my desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out the title deed, smoothing it out like it was a sacred relic. My name. Not Sorrel's, not Mom's, not anyone else's. "They want to talk names?" I murmured. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "Let's talk contracts." I didn't sleep that night. The quiet hum of my apartment, once soothing, felt like a warning siren muffled under drywall. I spent the early hours pacing. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a breath held too long. Every shadow cast by headlights on the wall looked like something about to collapse. By mid-morning, the rain had returned, not pounding but persistent, a fine, needling drizzle that Portland specialized in. I wrapped a scarf around my neck, grabbed my umbrella, and drove across town to the old apartment. My reason for going was simple. Retrieve a few sentimental things I hadn't had the heart to move. An old photo album and a cardboard box labeled Venice Honeymoon Keepsakes. I knocked once, more out of formality than hope. Knox opened the door with a flat expression, as if I were a mail carrier, not the owner of the space he was lounging in. "I need to grab a couple of things," I said. He tilted his head slightly, casual. "Oh, we got rid of some of that old junk. Thought it was just leftover crap." I stared at him, the words struggling to make sense. "What do you mean, got rid of?" He leaned against the doorframe like this was a regular Tuesday. "That blue vase, sold it. Facebook Marketplace, $50, you're welcome." My hands clenched before I even realized it. That vase wasn't just decoration. It was from Venice, our last peaceful trip before the divorce turned everything sour. I kept it not for the memory of the man, but the moment, the fragile illusion of beauty during chaos. "You sold it?" I repeated flatly. He shrugged. "It was just sitting there." I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out. Back in my car, the heat blasting against my frozen fingers, I sat there in silence. Then my phone rang. Mom. Against my better judgment, I picked up. I didn't say hello, just held the phone to my ear. "What is going on with you?" she demanded immediately. "Sorrel said you barged in and started yelling at Knox." "I didn't yell," I said. "But even if I had, it would have been justified. They sold something that wasn't theirs." She snorted. "You always hold on to things too tightly. Maybe that's why your marriage didn't last." I said nothing. Not because I didn't have words, but because none of them would have landed where they needed to. Her voice cut again through the line like a knife dull from overuse. "You're acting like a tyrant, Marin. Maybe try some empathy for once." I didn't hang up, but I did let the phone fall into my lap, screen still glowing, her voice now muffled and distant like static from another planet. When I got home, I walked straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing. No music, no glass of wine, no journal entry to process what I was feeling. This wasn't a moment for reflection. This was war. Clean, paper-bound, legally defined. I drafted a formal eviction notice. I copied my lawyer on the email. I attached photos. The broken lamp base, the beer stains on the rug, a screenshot of the online listing that still showed the blue vase in the recently sold section. I included screenshots of texts never replied to, the utilities doubled, the mail that vanished, and the rules they had taped on the fridge like I was a tenant in my own property. "If they want to treat me like a stranger," I murmured aloud, "then they'll get the version of me who doesn't knock first, the version who uses certified mail." That night, I printed the letter, folded it carefully, slipped it into a crisp envelope, and sealed it with a deliberate press of my palm. On the front, in block letters, I wrote, "To Sorrel and Knox, open immediately." I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. But for the first time in weeks, I felt solid. 2 days passed. I didn't hear anything after slipping the envelope under their door. No apologies, no messages, not even a passive-aggressive emoji from Sorrel. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like the breath someone takes before they strike. The strike came at 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was in a meeting at work, glancing through marketing reports, when a message popped up on my phone. Subject: HOA inquiry, urgent response requested. My stomach flipped. I stepped out into the hallway, opened the email, and stood there frozen beneath the fluorescent lights. The letter was polite, cold, official. "We've received a complaint alleging repeated unannounced visits, verbal intimidation, and disruption of tenant peace. If verified, these actions would constitute a violation of HOA conduct policies. You may be required to request prior written permission to enter the property. Please submit your written response within 72 hours. I read it twice before the words stopped blurring. Knox had gone to the HOA, not just whining. He'd filed a formal complaint against me, in my own building, as if I were the trespasser, the threat. I took it, said nothing. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. Then I whispered, "They're turning my home into evidence, and me into the criminal." Back at my desk, I couldn't focus. I excused myself early and headed to my car. My hands trembled as I turned the keys, but this time it wasn't fear, it was fury. By the time I reached home, I was already pulling up Knox's social profiles. That's when I saw it. A coworker had sent it to me via Slack with the message, is this you? Reddit. Neighborhood Watch subreddit. The title read, "Landlords like this are why we can't have peace." My face was right there, frozen mid-sentence in a still frame from a video I hadn't known existed. The clip showed me banging on the apartment door. No sound, no context. Just a GIF loop with my name blurred out, but only barely. The comments were brutal. Classic Karen energy. Hope the tenants sue her. If she's this unhinged on camera, imagine what she's like off it. One user had connected my face to my LinkedIn profile. Wow, she works in marketing. Explains the fake charm. 400 comments. Shares across Facebook. A tweet that was going semi-viral. I didn't cry. I didn't reply. I screen recorded the entire thread and saved every image, every comment. Archived it all in a folder labeled defamation_evident not officially, he said. But yeah, it was always in the background. The air in the room thinned. I didn't shout. I didn't storm off. I just stood up. Tell Mom I'll pick up the last of my things from the apartment today. On the way out, I paused at the doorway, my hand on the frame. She never thought I'd need that place, did she? Dad didn't answer. He didn't have to. By mid-afternoon, I was standing outside the apartment one last time. It looked smaller now, like grief does when you finally stop feeding it. Knox was nowhere in sight. Good. One less face I had to pretend not to despise. Sorrel was packing boxes in the living room, surrounded by the echo of cheap perfume and something that smelled like burned toast. When she saw me, she didn't say hello, just handed me an envelope. Already sealed, she said. C_001. Then I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. The next morning, I sat across from her in a small office downtown, while she reviewed the footage and printed screenshots. Her demeanor was calm, practiced, but I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. "You're dealing with someone who's manipulative," she said. "He's controlling the narrative because he knows how it works. Don't fight this emotionally, fight it methodically." We began building our case, a formal cease and desist to the HOA, a detailed rebuttal with photographic evidence of the apartment's damage, screenshots showing Knox and Sorrel denying access and failing to respond, archived Reddit threads, deleted comments, metadata timestamps, everything. "I'm done letting them speak first," I said. My voice didn't shake. I got home that evening and opened my laptop. I clicked reply all to the HOA email, attached all the files. I wrote concisely and without apology my response. I explained how this tenant wasn't on a lease. I explained how my name was on the deed. I submitted formal proof of ownership, legal correspondence, and the eviction notice already in progress. Before I hit send, I added one sentence. "The only person being intimidated here is me." I clicked submit. Then I opened my messages and typed a short text to my lawyer. "Let's file. I'm ready." 3 days after we filed, I found myself pulling into my parents' driveway again. The skies were finally clear, like they'd run out of ways to punish me. The sun didn't warm me, it just lit up the mess more clearly. Mom stayed in the kitchen, rattling pans like she had something to prove. But Dad asked to talk in the den. We sat across from each other, a low hum of the heater filling the gaps in our silence. He looked tired, older than he had a week ago. "There's something you should know," he began, his eyes fixed on the floor between us. "Your mother, she always assumed that when you remarried, you'd move on, that the apartment wouldn't matter anymore." I didn't respond. I just blinked slowly. "She thought," he continued, voice tightening, "that maybe it would be better if Sorrel had it, for stability." "Are you saying this was the plan all along?" I asked, but it didn't even come out as a question. It came out flat, like a diagnosis. He finally looked at me, and I saw it. The guilt, the weariness of a man who didn't agree, but also didn't stop it. As she continued taping a box, I unfolded the note inside. "You win. Enjoy your little kingdom. Maybe if you knew how to love people, you wouldn't always be so alone." I read it twice. No sting, just confirmation. She still thought this was about winning. She still thought she was owed something because she had less. I slipped the letter back into the envelope and tucked it into my coat pocket. Then I looked at her, really looked. You know what the difference is between us? I said. I had to learn how to live without applause. She didn't reply. She just taped the last box like it was the final point in a game I refused to play. By sundown, she was gone. The apartment felt hollow in a different way now, not just empty, but exhaled, like a space finally released from being misused. I walked through each room slowly, running my fingers over surfaces, opening cabinets, closing drawers. No more beer cans, no more strangers' laughter, just quiet. I paused in the bedroom. That was where I'd first curled up after signing my divorce papers, on the floor, with nothing but a throw blanket and a bag of takeout. And yet I'd felt safer then than I had in recent months. A knock on the door snapped me back. The locksmith. He didn't ask questions, just greeted me with a nod and got to work. While he replaced the lock, I stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the sun dip behind the neighboring rooftops. He handed me the new keys 20 minutes later. All done, he said. I paid, thanked him, and walked him to the door. Once it closed, I locked it, twice, then leaned my forehead against the cool wood. Done, I whispered. Finally. The next morning, I woke up to stillness. No unread messages, no lawyers on hold, no dread pacing the hallway outside my bedroom door, just light slipping between the blinds and a strange sense of completion. 1 week later, I brought in a professional cleaning crew. They scrubbed the apartment from top to bottom, scented the air with lemon, and lifted the months of grime out of the corners. It was a necessary reset, one I didn't realize I craved so badly. I kept the windows open the whole day, letting in the early spring air and whatever clarity it decided to carry with it. I repainted the walls myself. Soft almond in the bedroom, crisp white in the living room. Each stroke felt like reclaiming a part of my breath. I swapped out the light fixtures, pulled up the stained rug, replaced it with one I'd picked with intention. Something fresh, something mine. By the second Saturday, I took new photos and listed the apartment online. Clean, quiet, respectful tenants only. A week later, I met the new tenant at the door. Her name was Elise, medical resident, new to Portland, barely older than Sorrel. But the look in her eyes held responsibility, something grounded. She asked thoughtful questions. She signed every page of the lease carefully, no corners skipped. As I handed her the keys, I said, "Respect the space and it'll take care of you." She smiled. "I've been looking for something like this for months, thank you." I watched her walk inside and didn't feel a sting, just a quiet kind of pride. That night I sat on my couch, wine in hand, bare feet curled under me, when my phone lit up. It was a group message. From Mom. "Mom, we know things got messy. Your dad and I hope we can sit down together soon. When you're ready." I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the thread either. I stared at her words for a long time, like they might morph into something less rehearsed. Forgiveness wasn't a prize I was ready to hand out just because someone remembered my name again. And honestly, maybe I was done trying to be the bigger person if it meant always being the one bleeding quietly. I slid the phone face down on the coffee table. 2 days later, I ran into Mrs. Varela in the elevator. "Quiet week," she said, adjusting the strap of her purse. "Glad to see the old noise is gone." I smiled. "You and me both." She leaned in, voice hushed. "I heard Sorrel moved back in with your parents." I figured. "And the boy, what's his name?" "Knox." "Yes, him. Someone said he moved to LA. Apparently that charm doesn't stretch far when the money's not someone else's." I gave a non-committal nod. I wasn't interested in Knox's downfall or Sorrel's regret. I wasn't even interested in closure. They could figure themselves out on someone else's time. What I had was a key that worked, a home that breathed again, and a silence that finally sounded like peace. That weekend, I found it. I was scrolling online, browsing vintage listings I didn't need, when it appeared. The vase. The one from Venice. The one Knox sold for $50. Now? It cost more. Of course it did. But I didn't hesitate. I clicked buy now. When it arrived, I opened the box slowly, peeled away the layers of bubble wrap like something sacred lived inside. It was the same vase. The crack near the base was still there, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. I ran my fingers over it gently and placed it on the windowsill in my kitchen, where the morning sun caught its blue curves just right. They had broken things, but I replaced them. Not because they deserved a second chance, or because I forgave the damage, but because I forgave myself for trusting they wouldn't break them in the first place. I stood back and let the light pour in. Some scars you carry. Some you frame. Some lessons in life don't come wrapped in apologies or sealed in resolutions. They come in silence, when no one shows up to explain, when closure isn't handed to you, and when the people who hurt you go on like nothing happened. But that's where you find your strength. Not in winning the argument, not in proving a point, but in rebuilding. Quietly, deliberately, for yourself. If you've ever given too much, stayed too long, or silenced your own needs just to keep the peace, then maybe this story is yours too. Maybe you've also learned that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. And that choosing yourself doesn't make you the villain, it makes you whole. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw the line with someone you loved? Or reclaim something that was yours? Your peace, your home, your voice? Let's talk in the comments. If this story resonated with you, leave a 1 in the chat or tell me where you're watching from. I'd really love to know. And hey, if you didn't like the story, tell me why. Was it too close to home or too far from your own? Either way, thank you for being here. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, sometimes messy, but always human, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive. I'll see you in the next one. Hi, I'm Raylene. I used to think family meant protection, loyalty, at the very least, fairness. But then my own mother looked me in the eye and said I ruined her life. She kicked me out of the house I paid for after I cleared her debts, covered her bills, and stayed when no one else did. On moving day, I smiled, but not for the reason you might think. They forged my name, stole my home, erased me from every picture, and still acted like I owed them more. How did it come to this? How do you fight back when the people hurting you are the ones who raised you? And what do you do when silence isn't safety, but strategy? Let me tell you what really happened. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my back felt like it had caved in. I'd done a double shift. Again. The front yard was scattered with brittle leaves, the wind brushing them across the porch in lazy circles. My keys jingled faintly in my hand as I pushed open the front door, balancing a bag of groceries against my hip. No one came to greet me. I could hear laughter, hers. My mother hadn't laughed like that in years, not even after Dad's funeral. I stepped into the kitchen and froze. There they were, Tom and Myra, feet propped on the coffee table like it was theirs. Myra held a glass of wine, pinky slightly raised, like she was playing some version of Suburban Queen. My brother didn't even glance up from his phone. Velda didn't look my way. She smiled at Myra and said, "If I never had her, my life would have turned out so much better." She said it so casually, it almost didn't land. Almost. I stood there, in my scrubs, shoes still damp from the parking lot at the hospital. The grocery bag slipped slightly in my grip. No one moved to help. I turned, walked to the fridge, and quietly put the milk away. "Dinner's in an hour," Velda added, like I was the help. I said nothing, just nodded. Later that night, I noticed the hallway shelf was empty. My picture frame's gone. The vase I bought from that fall festival last year, replaced by a plastic centerpiece that looked like it belonged in a cheap motel. I followed the quiet shift in energy as I made my way into the living room. Tom's old college photo was framed and centered above the fireplace. His shoes, worn but polished, sat near the entry bench, where Dad used to leave his. Myra's scarf was draped over the back of the couch. The entire room smelled like her hairspray. "Did something change?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. Tom looked up with a half smirk. "It's Mom's house, isn't it? We're family." Velda chimed in without missing a beat. "They'll be staying indefinitely. I need their support now." I almost laughed. Support? Like I hadn't been covering the mortgage for over a year, Like I hadn't just paid off her overdue medical bills while skipping vacations and eating microwave dinners on my night shifts. Instead, I sat down across from them. There wasn't even a chair left in the room that hadn't been moved to face Tom. I crossed my legs and looked at the floor. Dinner came and went like a scripted play. Tom was served first, his plate full, still steaming. Mine was handed to me after everyone else, the roast barely warm. I ate quietly while Myra talked about painting the walls, a cleaner white, and adding a more modern touch to the kitchen. No one asked about the hospital, about the case I'd stayed overtime to handle, about the patient who didn't make it. At one point, Velda looked over at Myra and said, "I feel so relaxed with you here. You're like the daughter I always wanted." The fork paused midair in my hand. I swallowed hard. Not food, just silence. I excused myself after I cleared the plates, though no one seemed to notice I was gone. Upstairs, the air was colder somehow. Maybe it was the draft from the old window, maybe something deeper. I changed into an oversized t-shirt and sat on the edge of my bed, still in the same socks from my shift. I could hear them laughing downstairs. Louder this time. My mother's voice rose above the others, sharp and free. "If I were gone tomorrow," I whispered to the quiet room, "would they even notice?" My phone buzzed beside me, a bank alert. Something about a charge I didn't remember making. I stared at the screen, then turned it face down. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. I stayed in bed a few minutes longer than usual, not because I was tired, but because something kept gnawing at me. The bank alert from the night before hadn't left my mind. I hadn't touched my savings account in weeks, yet there it was, blinking like a warning light. By the time I got dressed and made my way downstairs, Velda was already in the kitchen, stirring her coffee like she had no idea she'd spent the last dinner reminding me I didn't belong. She didn't glance my way when I entered. Just took a slow sip, eyes fixed out the window. "Morning," I said, opening the fridge and pretending not to care. She replied, the kind of sound people make when they can't be bothered with words. I took my phone and sat at the table, pretending to scroll through the news. But instead, I logged into my online banking account. The screen loaded slowly, like it too was hesitant to show me what I already suspected. And then, I saw it. A personal loan opened in my name. $30,000. I blinked, checked again. It listed our home address. The borrower, me. But I hadn't applied for anything, not even a credit card in the past year. I clicked through the details, my hand tightening around the phone. The disbursement date? 4 months ago. Around the same time, Velda's car was suddenly repaired, and Tom got that new laptop. I remembered her saying it was some family help. I looked up from the screen and watched her slice an orange like nothing in the world was wrong. "Mom," I said carefully. "Did you need a loan a few months back? Maybe under my name?" She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just said, "I don't recall anything like that." "Why would I do that, honey?" I nodded, like that was an answer. Then I got up, walked out, and closed the door softly behind me. I spent the next couple hours tearing through drawers, looking for paperwork. My passport, which I kept in a side drawer for emergencies, was gone. The folder with my lease agreement and a few personal contracts I'd stored years ago, also missing. I checked the hallway closet, one I'd used to keep spare blankets, winter boots, a box of keepsakes from college. But the shelves were bare, except for a few dusty puzzles. My storage bin? Gone. Instead, I found a cardboard box labeled in thick black Sharpie, MISC. I opened it to find my things, trophies from high school debate, my employee badge from my first nursing job, a letter from Dad folded neatly in its original envelope. Everything shoved in carelessly, like junk in a garage sale. I stared at the box for a long time. Then I picked it up and carried it back into my room. That evening, Myra passed by in the hallway with a roll of wallpaper samples in her hand. She didn't even acknowledge me, Inside the bedroom, my bedroom, though it didn't feel like mine anymore, I printed every page from the bank's loan portal. I compared the signatures line by line. It was nearly perfect. Same slant, same loop on the Y in my name. But it wasn't mine, and I knew it. I pulled out a magnifying glass, something I hadn't touched in years, a gift from Dad when I said I wanted to be a detective. The ink pressure was inconsistent. The signature had been traced, then copied. Scrolling further, I saw the witness signature, Myra K. Hastings. Of course. I didn't slam anything. Didn't yell. I placed the pages into a manila envelope, sealed it, and wrote in neat letters across the front. 4 later. Just then, I heard Myra laughing downstairs. Through the thin walls, her voice carried clearly. "No, seriously," she was saying to someone on the phone. "We'll redo the whole living room once she's gone. I already picked out the sectional. It's so much brighter than what we have now. Her stuff just makes everything look sad." I didn't feel sad. I felt awake. I set the envelope beside my handbag and turned on my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then I typed, Jolisa Reed, civil litigation attorney, a name I hadn't thought about in years. We'd gone to school together. She specialized in financial and familial fraud now. I remembered that from a LinkedIn post someone had shared. I bookmarked the site, closed the tab. That night at dinner, I didn't speak. When Tom asked if I'd had a productive little day, I smiled and said, "Absolutely." When Myra leaned over and asked if I was feeling okay, I nodded. Never better. Back upstairs, I moved the envelope from my bag to the top drawer of my nightstand. Then I turned off the light and laid down without changing clothes. They think I'm too quiet to notice, that I'm too tired to fight. They erased me from the house, but they forgot one thing. I see everything. By the time Saturday rolled around, I already knew better than to expect fairness. Velda had invited some extended family over for dinner, cousins I hadn't seen in years. "Just a small gathering," she'd said, like I was the caterer and not her daughter. I spent the better part of the afternoon in the kitchen, roasted 2 chickens, baked sweet potato casseroles, steamed greens, even pulled together a lemon chess pie from scratch. Tom walked by twice and didn't say a word. Myra hovered behind me with a glass of white wine, giving feedback as if I worked for her. "Maybe go easier on the pepper next time," she muttered, sniffing a spoonful. "Not everyone likes it spicy." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That wasn't the point. At 6, the guests arrived. Velda had rearranged the dining table so Tom could sit at the head. She placed herself to his right, Myra to his left. I was placed at the far end, where the light from the ceiling fixture barely reached. Dinner began. Velda served Tom first, piling his plate like he hadn't eaten in days. The guests came next. Smiles, laughter, a toast. Then Myra. My plate came last. By then, the chicken was already losing its warmth, and the gravy had settled into a lukewarm puddle. A cousin, Aunt Marie's daughter, I think, leaned over, asked sweetly, "And what do you do, dear?" Before I could speak, Velda answered for me. "Oh, she just works at a desk. Nothing worth mentioning." The cousin nodded politely, already looking away. I took a bite of my food. It tasted like cardboard. My stomach tightened, not from hunger. The conversation buzzed around me. Tom bragged about a new job lead, which I was pretty sure was just a recruiter's email. Myra chimed in about her plans to repaint the kitchen. "I want a coastal feel," she said, placing her wineglass down gently. "That soft blue-gray, maybe some new cabinets. You know, a fresher look." Velda nodded. "Oh, definitely. It's time this house reflected a new energy." I wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin and said, steady and calm, "Maybe we should talk about how we're splitting expenses. You know, food, utilities, even just a third." The room fell quiet. Then Velda picked up her glass, slammed it against the coaster hard enough to startle a few people. "You're still here for free, and you want to split bills?" she snapped. "You live off me. You always have." I let the words hang in the air. Didn't rush to defend myself. Nobody said a word, not even the cousins. One of them took another sip of their wine and looked down at their plate. I nodded slowly, then stood up. "Excuse me," I said, pushing my chair back quietly. "I forgot I have a few things to finish." I didn't go far, just stepped out onto the back porch, letting the cold evening air cool my face. My hands were clenched in my jacket pockets. I didn't cry. I was far beyond that stage. I just stared out at the backyard, remembering all the times I'd raked those leaves for her, thinking I was being helpful. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the dishes had been cleared, I sat in my room with my laptop open. The screen glowed softly in the dark. I opened my bank account. There it was, a $728 charge from a furniture store. I hadn't made that purchase. I clicked through the transaction details. Delivery address, our house. Buyer, Myra Hastings. The receipt included a "thanks for your purchase" message and a picture of a coffee table. I knew that table. It had arrived last week. She said it was a gift from her parents. I walked downstairs, found her in the living room, watching a true crime documentary like nothing had happened. "Myra," I said, holding up my phone, "did you use my account for this?" She looked over at me, casual as ever. "Velda said it's all part of the household. Don't be petty." "Petty?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She shrugged. "It's just furniture. We all live here, don't we?" Velda stepped in from the hallway like she'd been waiting for her cue. "If you want to stay here, stop complaining. This is my house. You don't get to control everything." I looked at her, at both of them. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. Instead, I turned and walked back upstairs. In my room, I sat at my desk and opened a draft email I'd written weeks ago, one I hadn't been brave enough to send. The subject line read, "Resignation, effective immediately." I stared at it for a long time, then hit delete. They weren't going to push me out of my work the way they tried to erase me from this house. Instead, I opened a new document. Title: Documentation Log. Property, financial, verbal abuse. I began typing. Entry 1. They used my name, my money, my silence. I saved the file and backed it up to a flash drive. I wasn't going anywhere. They wanted silence. I gave them a record instead. I didn't sleep much after that. My body lay still, but my mind had found a rhythm of its own. Quiet, methodical. I spent the next few days keeping everything surface level. I made coffee. I smiled during dinner. I nodded when Velda told me to pick up more detergent. But underneath, I was collecting pieces. Watching, listening. Late one evening, after cleaning up the kitchen and making sure no one was hovering nearby, I went into the hallway closet where we kept old files in a locked cabinet. Dad had insisted on fireproof containers, said, "Paper tells the truth better than people." The key still worked. I pulled out a folder labeled Insurance and Property, thick with yellowing pages and clipped receipts. Flipping through it, a document caught my eye. Property Transfer Authorization, notarized. I sat down on the floor and scanned it twice. The page looked official, signed, and stamped by someone I'd never met. But my name was on the transfer line. The house had been legally signed over to Velda. And the date? The day it was notarized, I had worked a 12-hour double at the hospital. There was no way I had signed this. I took a deep breath, then grabbed the folder and carried it back to my room, locking the door behind me. I laid it out under the lamp, alongside my employee schedule from that week. Side by side, the contradictions stared back at me. I remembered Velda handing me a stack of insurance renewal forms that same week, pages I signed without question. She'd slipped it in, and I never saw it coming. A couple nights later, Velda hosted another dinner for family. I kept my tone even, my plate full. The relatives were the same tired group who only showed up for a free meal or to get in good graces with whoever paid the bills. Tom held court like he always did, arms wide, voice louder than necessary. "Honestly, if I hadn't stepped in," he announced between bites of roast, "this house would have fallen apart years ago. I looked at him without blinking. He continued, I've been helping Mom with the mortgage. Covered a few foundation fixes last summer. Got the pipes sorted out too. You remember that water bill spike? Myra chimed in. And don't forget the back porch repairs. Velda sat next to him, silent. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head. Just let it land. Aunt Trudy leaned toward me and whispered, Wow, I didn't realize Tom was carrying that much. You must be grateful. I wanted to say, I've paid every utility for 2 years. But I didn't. I smiled instead and offered her more gravy. Later that night, I returned to my room and opened a box I hadn't touched since Dad passed. Inside were receipts, statements, and the original closing documents for the house. Every canceled check I'd used to cover the mortgage after Dad died. Line after line in black ink. My handwriting, my money, my name. I lined them up on the bed next to Tom's proof, which was nothing more than vague repair quotes and a handful of Venmo screenshots showing payments to himself. The timelines didn't match. The numbers didn't add up. I printed everything and created folders, each labeled clearly. Utilities, 2021. Mortgage transfers, bank correspondence. By the time I was done, the paperwork filled an entire tote bag. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started a new document. Title, Affidavit, Property Ownership Dispute. Beneath it, I began writing what I knew. Dates, dollar amounts, names. This time, I included 2 witnesses who had helped me file the original paperwork, a retired nurse from the hospital and one of Dad's old friends from church. Both had nothing to gain. Both would tell the truth. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the principal. The next morning at breakfast, Tom strolled in like a sitcom character, hair still damp from his shower, sipping coffee from a mug that said, Best son ever. He looked at Velda and grinned. Maybe one day, I'll actually put my name on the deed, right, Mom? She chuckled, the way people do when they think the punchline's innocent. Maybe you earned it. I finished my toast, placed my napkin on the table, and said, Maybe I'll show you who really owns it. Tom laughed like I'd told a joke. Velda's smile faltered for just a second. I got up without another word and walked to my room. Closing the door behind me, I opened my laptop, clicked confirm, and scheduled a notary appointment. They'd signed their parts. Now it was my turn. Chapter 5. 4253. The snow had started earlier than expected that Thursday evening. I came home through the back entrance, brushing flakes from my coat, hoping the cold would quiet my thoughts. For once, I wasn't late. I'd swapped shifts with a colleague just to make it home before dinner. Not for their sake, but because something inside me said I needed to be here. As I passed the laundry room, I heard voices, low, unguarded. I paused, hand still on the doorknob. She's not going to last much longer, Tom's voice echoed through the hallway. Once she's gone, everything resets. I'll move the paperwork next week. Velda's response came after a sip of something. Good, and I'll finally make a proper will, with the right child on it this time. I stood still, heart pounding not from surprise, but from the confirmation of what I already suspected. I slid my phone from my coat pocket, tapped record, and caught the last 20 seconds of their conversation. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I backed away quietly and slipped into the kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd made every Thanksgiving dish for the last 7 years. The same counter they now used for their wine glasses and gossip. Later, in my bedroom, I played the recording back, letting it loop while I changed into an old sweatshirt. Their words didn't sting. They validated everything. I listened once more, then opened my laptop and searched for a name I hadn't thought about since college, Jolisa Reed. She was always sharp, even back then. She didn't speak unless she had something that cut. I found her firm's website easily enough. Family law, financial abuse, property disputes, exactly the kind of battles I now found myself forced into. I typed a short message. Still want to be my lawyer? I hit send and didn't expect anything for a day or two. She called within 10 minutes. Been waiting for you to ask, Jolisa said, her voice just as direct as I remembered. You should have reached out months ago. I wasn't ready. No one ever is. Let's start with the property transfer. I'll need copies. If that signature isn't yours, and they filed it as legal, we've got leverage. They did. And Raylene, she added, her tone shifting. If they lied on anything else, they're in for more than just embarrassment. I exhaled, nodding even though she couldn't see me. That night, I pulled out every folder, every printed receipt, every copy of the bills I'd paid in my name. I laid them across the bed like puzzle pieces waiting to be fit together. There were scanned lease agreements from 2020, bank logs detailing every transfer I'd made since Dad passed, and emails with Velda confirming payment amounts. Halfway through the stack, I came across a message from my father. It was short, buried in an old email thread from the month before he died. If anything happens to me, make sure you keep the house safe. It's yours. I stared at the words, my hand trembling just slightly. I printed it out and slipped it into the emotional manipulation folder. By the time I was done organizing, I'd created 3 distinct categories: fraud, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation. I took photos of each page, backed everything up onto a USB, then placed it in a small lockbox. An hour later, I received an email from Jolisa. Schedule a notary. This gets real now. I replied with 3 words. Already did. Monday. The house was quiet when I finally stepped into the kitchen to grab something to eat. The roast from earlier was cold, but I didn't mind. I sat at the table alone, slowly cutting into the meat, listening to the faint sounds upstairs. Velda's laughter filtered through the ceiling vents. High, familiar, the kind of laugh that used to mean safety when I was small. Now it was just noise. I thought about the sound of her voice that morning when she said Tom had earned the deed. I thought about how many times she'd turned her back on the truth just to make her story sound cleaner. Let them laugh. Let them plan. They thought they were winning. But while they were making toasts and rewriting history, I was building a case, one document at a time. I whispered to no one. They drew the line. I just chose which side of it I'm standing on. Saturday afternoon settled in like a quiet warning. The snow from the night before had hardened along the window panes, catching just enough sunlight to blur the living room in pale reflection. I waited until the kitchen was empty. Velda and Myra had gone out to buy a few things for the new guest room, as they called it, and then slipped into the hallway closet with my keys in hand. The fireproof cabinet hadn't been touched in years. It still had the scent of old cardboard and dried glue. I opened it slowly, careful not to disturb the dust, and pulled out the folders one by one. Most were labeled in Velda's handwriting: car, health, utilities. But near the back, under a stack of tax returns, I found it. A tab marked property transfer. My chest tightened. I sat cross-legged on the hallway carpet and opened the folder under the weak light. It was a notarized deed transfer form, moving ownership of the house from me to Velda. Dated, stamped, signed, and there, scribbled near the bottom in near-perfect cursive, was my name. Except I hadn't signed it. The date on the document matched a hospital double I had pulled during the height of flu season. I remembered coming home barely conscious, collapsing into bed in my scrubs, still wearing my badge. That night, Velda had handed me a few forms to review. Insurance renewals, she'd said. She had slipped it in, hidden it in plain sight. The signature was close enough to pass, but not mine. I scanned it twice more, then snapped a photo and placed the document inside my folder labeled fraud. No panic, just precision. The next morning over breakfast, I waited for an opening. Velda was spreading jelly on toast, Myra was reading a home decor magazine, and Tom had his earbuds in, nodding to music none of us could hear. "Mom," I said calmly, "we need to talk about the deed transfer." Velda paused just for a second. What are you talking about, honey? The document I found yesterday, transferring the house to you, my signature's on it, but I didn't sign it. Her eyes narrowed, then softened too quickly. You've been under a lot of pressure. That stress, it can affect memory. Myra looked up without lifting her head. Is she going off again? Velda patted my hand like I was a child trying to remember a dream. Maybe take a few days off work, get some rest. You're always so tense lately. I pulled my hand back. I'm fine. What I'm not is confused. They said nothing. I cleared my plate and walked away. That afternoon, I went into the garage to look through one of Dad's old tool drawers. I was hoping for nothing in particular, until I saw the curtain rod above the bench. It had always been slightly off-kilter, bent on one side. Out of instinct more than logic, I climbed up and checked behind it. Wedged between the rod and the wooden wall brace was a slim envelope, aged and yellowing, sealed with a piece of tape barely holding. On the front, in Dad's handwriting, were 5 words. To be opened by Raylene only. I climbed down slowly and peeled it open at my desk. Inside was a single page. His will. It was straightforward. The house, its assets, and all contents were to go to me. There was a clause explicitly stating that if anyone contested the will, their claim would be voided. The witness signature? Jolisa's father. A man I remembered from Sunday church picnics. Solid, honest, now gone. I took a photo of every inch of the document, then placed it in a fresh folder labeled Primary Source. Sunday morning, I brought it to the table and laid it between the butter dish and the coffee pot. What's this? Tom asked, half laughing. The truth, I replied, sliding the paper toward Velda. Her face paled. Myra leaned over to read, then looked up with her eyebrows high, expression unreadable. Velda finally spoke. This is old, irrelevant. He changed his mind. You mean you hid it? I said. Not anymore. Tom tried to laugh it off. Come on, Ray. What's the point of digging up old stuff? Let's just move forward. We are, I said, but on record. Velda snatched the paper off the table and stood. This isn't how family handles things. No, I said, pushing my chair back, but it's how people handle theft. I walked upstairs, closing the door softly behind me. I scanned the will into my laptop, converted it to PDF, and sent it to Jolisa. The subject line, Primary Leverage Secured. I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out the flash drive. Across the front, I'd written in permanent marker, all of it. The clock on my nightstand read 10:47 a.m. I set the alarm for 6:30 the next morning, because tomorrow the files wouldn't just sit in my desk drawer anymore. Tomorrow they'd be filed with the court. The filing went through that Monday morning. Jolisa confirmed it with a one-line email. It's done. I didn't dance or cry or throw fists in the air. I just stood in my kitchen, staring at the coffee machine, watching the light blink in rhythm with my breath. It had taken weeks of preparation, years of silence, and less than an hour in front of a clerk to pull the rug out from under them. By the following Sunday, Velda decided it was time for a family lunch. Her tone on the note she slid under my door was syrupy. Let's talk things through, just us. The way someone smiles while hiding a knife behind their back. Snow had crusted over the sidewalks again. Myra had set the table with cloth napkins and mismatched silverware that tried too hard to look intentional. Tom was dressed like he was about to give a TED Talk. Slacks, button-down, no socks. Velda wore pearls she hadn't touched since Dad's funeral. The food was forgettable. Soggy green beans. A roast that needed 10 more minutes in the oven. But none of that mattered. My appetite had checked out weeks ago. Midway through the meal, Myra took a photo of the table and posted it to social media. I watched her phone as she typed the caption, "Family means love." The image appeared online seconds later. Velda, Tom, Myra, a few of Velda's cousins, all smiling. I wasn't in it. They hadn't asked me to scoot closer or to smile. They'd simply angled the shot to cut me out entirely. I didn't say a word. I just picked up my water glass and finished it slowly. The ice clinked at the bottom as I set it down. Velda launched into small talk, pretending to reminisce about the good old days, how she missed real conversations around the table. Tom leaned in and said something about starting a podcast, and everyone chuckled like he was clever. I looked around at the people in that room, people who used to braid my hair, kiss my forehead, pass me mashed potatoes, and realized none of them saw me anymore. They only saw what I wasn't. Not Tom, not agreeable, not manipulatable. After lunch, I retreated to my room and waited for evening to fall. The email came just after 7 p.m. Confirmation of transfer. Executed. Your property has been legally sold to firm name withheld. Jolisa had handled it all. Quiet, clean, legal. The house was no longer under Velda's name. It wasn't under mine either. I'd sold it to a third-party real estate buyer Jolisa helped identify. A firm with no personal ties, no emotions, no guilt. Just paperwork. The forged deed Velda had used to steal the house back from me? Nullified. A clause in the sale ensured the property would be vacated in 10 days for inspection. It was all above board, all binding, all final. I took a walk around the house that night. Not out of nostalgia, just to say goodbye properly. I touched the kitchen counter where I'd spilled cocoa as a kid. Glanced at the hallway wall where my third-grade spelling bee photo used to hang. Ran my fingers along the banister I used to slide down when no one was looking. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the table while everyone ate breakfast like nothing was happening. Halfway through his eggs, Tom looked up. "Why are you so quiet?" I wiped my mouth, placed my napkin beside my plate, and stood up. "I'd recommend you start packing," I said, sliding a thick envelope onto the table. Velda blinked. "Excuse me? You have less than 2 weeks. The buyers are scheduled for a walkthrough." Tom scoffed. "This again?" Myra's laugh was high-pitched, like a balloon slowly losing air. "Raylene, no one takes you seriously." Velda rolled her eyes. "You're not serious." I opened the envelope, revealing the signed sale contract. "I am, and the new owners don't want squatters." Silence, pure and clean. I didn't wait for questions or a rebuttal. I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. That night, I sat at my desk and crossed off a date on my calendar. Day 10, formal eviction triggered. Around 9 p.m., there was a knock at my door. I didn't move. Another knock, softer. "Raylene?" Velda's voice, worn and reaching. "Can we talk?" I stood but didn't open the door. "You wouldn't do this to your own family." I stared at the wall in front of me, eyes dry. "You did it first," I said, just loud enough for her to hear. There was a long pause. Then the sound of her footsteps retreating down the hall. Monday morning arrived colder than expected. Sleet tapped lightly against the windshield as Jolisa and I sat parked outside Milwaukee Civil Court, watching people rush in under hoods and umbrellas. I hadn't spoken much on the drive downtown. I didn't need to. Everything I wanted to say had already been written, stamped, and submitted. We walked into the building together, the hall echoing with clipped footsteps and polite murmurs. The courthouse smelled like polished linoleum and wet wool coats, sharp, clinical, indifferent. They were already seated in the mediation room. Tom had on a blazer he probably hadn't worn since Dad's funeral. His tie was crooked. Myra was absent, babysitting her niece, according to Velda. And Velda, she looked tired but still wore her pearls like armor. Jolisa nodded to the clerk, introduced us, and pulled out the thick accordion folder she'd been carrying since sunrise. The mediator was neutral-faced, reading over the paperwork with dispassion. After confirming all parties, he turned to Jolisa. "Your client may proceed." Jolisa didn't hesitate. "We're submitting evidence of forged legal documents related to the property in question," she said. "This includes tampering with a notarized transfer, signing under false pretense, concealment of a valid will, and unauthorized use of financial accounts belonging to Ms. Raylene Holt." She placed several items on the table, color-coded tabs sticking out like small teeth. Velda folded her arms, but said nothing. The mediator flipped through the documents, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at Velda. "Mrs. Holt, do you deny the signature on the transfer form?" Velda opened her mouth, but her voice didn't follow right away. I don't recall the details. There were so many papers. Maybe she signed and forgot." I didn't move, didn't even blink. He turned the paper slightly toward Tom. "Mr. Holt, are you aware that the transfer form was submitted with your input?" Tom shifted in his seat, pulled at his collar. Mom said she had everything in order. I didn't sign anything myself." "You received funds through the account tied to the house," Jaleesa added. "Venmo transfers, 4 separate deposits." "Those were gifts," he muttered. "From your sister's account." He had no answer for that. The mediator looked at me. "Ms. Holt, you've remained quiet. May I ask, why are you pursuing this case now?" I met his eyes. "Because they used my silence as consent," I said evenly, "and I never said yes." The room stayed quiet longer than necessary. Then he nodded, marking something on his form. "We'll move to resolution." It didn't take long. The property was legally reversed to my name. The forged transfer deemed null. The sale to the real estate firm upheld. The court would update public record within 72 hours. Tom slumped like someone had pulled the air out of him. Velda, for the first time, looked directly at me. "This wasn't supposed to go this far," she said, voice almost cracking. I tilted my head slightly. "You made it legal when you forged my name." No more was said, no apologies, no promises. Outside, the cold slapped our faces. Jaleesa offered me her gloves, but I shook my head. "I'm fine," she smiled. "Feel lighter?" "Not yet," I said, "but cleaner." We walked to the car in silence. When we got in, I checked my phone. An email notification blinked at the top of the screen. Subject: Property transfer finalized. Message: Tenancy legally vacated. Premises available for full transfer. I replied with 2 words: clear to close. 3 weeks after the ruling, I stood in front of the window in my new place, a modest condo near the Milwaukee Riverwalk. Morning light spilled across the hardwood floors, catching on a potted aloe I hadn't yet remembered to water. Outside, winter had painted everything in soft gray. I watched the river for a while, then turned back toward my phone, which had just buzzed. A voicemail from Velda. I didn't listen to it immediately. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the play icon. Eventually, curiosity won over. "We didn't mean to hurt you," her voice said, brittle and shaking. "You're still my daughter." She paused, then added, "Tom and Myra are gone. We lost the lease. I don't have anywhere else to go." I didn't respond. I didn't save the message. Instead, I blocked the number and set the phone face down on the counter. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It felt deserved. Later that afternoon, I ran into someone familiar at the grocery store, a neighbor from our old street. She gave me that gentle, side-angled smile Midwest women use when they're about to share something uncomfortable. "Your mom," she said. "She's smaller these days. Quiet. I saw her at the pharmacy. She looked like she hadn't slept." I nodded. "Thanks for letting me know." And that was it. I didn't ask for more. Word had spread quickly. Tom had been fired a week after the ruling. Internal misconduct, someone said. Myra was living in a month-to-month rental near the freeway, barely visible through plastic-covered windows. Velda had relocated into a subsidized unit out on 35th Street. No furniture, no visitors. It's strange how quickly a house can forget its people. The new owners had already started renovations. A neighbor texted me a picture of the front porch being torn off. I didn't feel satisfaction, just closure. My own space was quiet, not just in sound, but in weight. I'd brought very little with me: essentials, a few framed prints, One kitchen knife I'd always liked using. The only thing from the old house was a canvas I'd found tucked behind Dad's workbench. It had been torn in half, the corners browned, but I'd taken it to a local artist who specialized in kintsugi-style restoration. Now, the tier was sealed with gold leaf. In the photo, I stood alone. But the line, the break, shone. I hung it by the entryway. Jaleesa stopped by that Friday afternoon. She didn't knock hard, just enough to let me know she was there. "I figured you wouldn't ask, so I brought coffee anyway," she said, stepping in and shaking snow off her boots. We sat by the window in silence for a while. The world outside was still and crisp. When she finally spoke, it wasn't about the case. "Have you been sleeping better?" I nodded. "I'm not waking up angry anymore. That's something." She smiled and raised her paper cup. "That's a lot." We didn't talk about Velda, or Tom, or the mess. Just the weather, her dog's new habit of barking at the mailman, a Netflix series I hadn't watched yet. Peace wasn't loud. It didn't come with fanfare. It just existed, quietly, when you finally made enough space for it. The next morning, I packed a small box, addressed to Velda, no return label, no note. Inside, I placed a photocopy of the original will. Not the court-certified one, just a plain printout. And beneath that, the family photo from years ago. The one where I had been cropped out on social media, but originally stood between Dad and Velda, smiling in a dress I'd picked out myself. On the photo, I took a black pen and filled in my silhouette until I was just a dark shape in the center of the group. Not erased, just blacked out. In the corner, near Velda's name, I wrote in small, neat ink, "You had the picture, I held the truth." I sealed the box and mailed it that same day. That night, I turned off my phone, unplugged the charger, and crawled into bed before 10. And for the first time in nearly a year, I slept through the night. "Hi, I'm Venitra. My family didn't just take my house, they erased me from it. They told everyone it was theirs, gave it to my brother, and when I didn't agree to disappear quietly, they changed the locks. Now, they're standing at my door with nothing left, asking me for help. But where were they when I slept in my car, when they told the courts I was unstable, when they used my silence to build their lie? What would you do if the people who raised you rewrote you right out of the story? Would you open the door? Or finally close it, for good?" I got the invite 3 days before the party. Not an actual invitation, of course, just a group text that read, "Family cookout this Saturday for Delmar's birthday. Bring sides." That was it. No, "Hi, Venitra." No, "Hope you can come." Just an obligation disguised as an invitation. Still, I went. I parked down the street, like I always did now. Something about pulling into the driveway of the house I paid for, but no longer lived in, felt like asking for permission I knew wouldn't be granted. The front lawn looked nice, new landscaping with mulch I didn't recognize. Someone had trimmed the hedges. I hadn't been there in nearly 6 months. Inside, the same smell, lemon pine sol and Charlene's pot roast. It made my stomach turn, not because I hated it, but because it reminded me of years I spent trying to belong in a home that never made room for me. On the folding table near the entryway, a sign said family name tags. I scanned the labels. Charlene, Marvin, Delmar, Trinell. Even the kids had their own. Mine said, "Guest of family." I peeled it off the backing and stuck it on my shirt like it didn't bother me. Charlene was in the kitchen, laughing. "Delmar just got promoted again. Regional now. Isn't that something?" I stepped in to say hi. "Oh, hi, baby," she said flatly, like I'd interrupted something sacred. "Did you bring potato salad?" "No," I said. "I wasn't assigned anything." "Well, there's plenty." She turned back to the pot on the stove. That was it. I found a spot near the back porch, where no one was talking much. Just me and the kids, who were too busy with phones to notice anyone else. At one point, Trinell handed me a juice box and said, "Can you give this to Lily? She still gets shy around people she doesn't know." I almost laughed. "People she doesn't know," she said. I'd helped change Lily's diapers. But sure, go ahead and erase me in real time. Dinner was announced with Marvin tapping a spoon to a solo cup. "Let's give thanks for being together," he started. "And to Delmar, our rock, our provider, our next chapter." He looked at his son like he was handing him the crown to a very small, very cheap kingdom. Charlene stepped in. "We also wanted to share something special. Delmar and Trinell have been such a blessing to this home. They've made it a real place for their family. So, Marvin and I have decided to transfer the house into their name permanently." Applause, smiles. Trinell looked shocked, but not surprised. I sat completely still. No one looked at me, not even Delmar. I didn't say a word. What could I have said that would have changed anything? They'd taken what was mine and gave it to the one they'd always chosen. I was just a name left off the deed, and now, apparently, off the guest list too. I stood up. No one noticed. Out on the front porch, I leaned against the railing, watching cars cruise by in the humid evening air. Across the street, old Mrs. Mendez walked her dog. She waved politely and asked, "You visiting family?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." She nodded, kept walking. Even the neighbors didn't know it was my house, my investment, my foundation. I listened to the laughter echoing inside and felt like an uninvited ghost. I had spent years helping keep that roof over our heads, and now I wasn't even allowed in the photograph of the memory. Later, in my car, I finally looked at the envelope from the group text that Trinell had printed for those who don't check their phones. It was addressed to Vanetta. I stared at the name. Vanetta. Not even close. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, trying not to let it feel like a funeral. Not for the house, not for the family, but for the version of me they never let exist. They never called her by her name. They never believed she built anything, and they never expected her to come back with receipts. That night, I tossed in the back seat of my car for hours. The AC had long given up fighting the Texas heat, and the faint glow of the corner laundromat flickered like it was breathing. I stared up at the car's ceiling and tried to pinpoint when exactly I'd become the guest in a house I built. My mind drifted back 5 years, to a day that should have felt like victory. I had just closed on the house, my house, after landing a major freelance contract that paid more than I'd made in the last 2 years combined. I was proud, not just for the money, but because I did it alone. Charlene didn't congratulate me. She frowned and said, "You're too young to be signing property papers without a man's name on it. What if someone takes advantage of you?" I remember blinking. "What kind of man would take my house?" She shrugged. "You'd be surprised." The pressure wasn't loud or aggressive. It never was. She couched it in concern, layered in those just looking out for you phrases Southern mothers are so good at. "You know how people talk in this neighborhood, V? A single woman on a deed? That just screams messy." Marvin stayed quiet. He always did. Eventually, I caved. I agreed to put the house in my father's name, temporarily. Just until I was settled, I told myself it wasn't giving up control, it was choosing peace. And peace, at the time, felt like something I could buy with a signature. A week later, I forwarded the final paperwork from the title company to Charlene's email. She never replied. Months passed. I brought it up once over dinner, when she asked how I liked the kitchen upgrades. I said, "It still feels strange not having my name on the documents." She didn't miss a beat. "Delmar had a great interview this week. If he lands this one, he'll be back on track." Back on track from what? I didn't know. Delmar always found ways to start over without finishing anything. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. The house became busier. Trinell moved in with the kids after they lost their lease. I didn't argue. "Family helps family," Charlene said. That was her mantra. By summer 2020, the master bedroom was handed over to Delmar. Charlene said it was best for the children's routine. I was offered the guest room, then the basement. Then, nothing. When online school started for the girls, Trinell claimed the guest room for remote learning space. I came home from work one evening and found my boxes in the hallway. "We didn't know where you'd want them," she said flatly, holding a juice box like she was in the middle of babysitting. I started sleeping in my car, first in the driveway, then in the laundromat parking lot 2 blocks away. I'd shower at the gym, use the restroom at work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was less humiliating than being ignored in my own home. I never told anyone, because no one ever asked. That was the rhythm of it. Charlene and Marvin called every now and then to ask if I could grab milk on the way home, or if I'd take the kids to school since I was already up. But they never asked where I was sleeping, never asked why my car had a pillow in the back seat. They didn't want to know. And I didn't give them the satisfaction of saying it out loud. What struck me, even then, was how seamless it all felt. As if I was the one fading out. As if my absence made everything easier. No conflict, no noise, just the slow erasure of my presence, like pencil lines being gently rubbed away. There were rules in that house, not posted on the fridge, not spoken directly, but deeply understood. Don't challenge your mother in front of company. Don't make Marvin choose between you and Delmar. Don't inconvenience Trinell. She's got a lot on her plate. Don't talk about what you've done. It's not humble. Don't remind them whose name should have been on the papers. Don't expect applause, especially not when you're not the favorite. I followed those rules like scripture. Until the day I didn't. Until the day I asked for space. For clarity, for basic acknowledgement. And that's when they stopped even pretending. I think the part that stung the most wasn't that they gave Delmar the house. It's that they always knew they would. I was never in the running. I was just a placeholder, someone to keep the lights on until the real owners arrived. Back in the present, I sat up in my car, stretched, and looked at my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I opened my email, typed in the county clerk's website, and clicked Start New Filing. They could ignore me. They could rewrite the story. But they couldn't erase the paper trail. By the time I submitted the first round of paperwork to the county clerk, the sun was beginning to set. I remember sitting there in my parked car, just outside the public library's Wi-Fi zone, watching as the horizon dulled into a dusty pink. I wasn't sure what felt heavier, the digital confirmation email on my screen, or the silence that followed. Not a single message. Not even a, "Where are you?" from Charlene. I didn't go back to the house that night, not because I couldn't. I still had my key, but I didn't want to walk into that kitchen and act like anything was normal. There wasn't a room in that house I could enter without being reminded I was a problem to be solved. And when a family sees you that way, you start solving yourself right out of the picture. It didn't come as a demand, not at first. That's not how Charlene worked. She liked to make things sound like choices you were already leaning toward. One evening after dinner, she glanced up from her crossword and said, "Have you thought about staying with Aunt Rhea for a while? Just to give the kids some space. Trinell says Lily's been waking up more at night." I remember blinking. "You want me to move out?" She set the pencil down calmly. "I didn't say that. I just think it might be good for everyone to breathe. You know how tight the house feels lately." She smiled like she was offering me a spa retreat. The way she worded things made it hard to argue. And if you did, you were overreacting or too sensitive. A few days later, I came home from work to find my laundry in a grocery bag on the floor. Trinell was standing in the hallway, scrolling through her phone. "Didn't know where you wanted it," she said. "We needed the dresser space for school supplies." Then she turned to her kids and said, "Hey, y'all, remember, Miss V's room is off limits. She won't be staying with us much longer." Miss V. Like I was a guest teacher who'd overstayed my welcome. I didn't say anything, not because I agreed, but because I knew it wouldn't change a thing. It's strange how children can be taught to fear you without a single lie. Just tone, just side eyes and hushed conversations. Delmar's oldest, Macy, started avoiding me altogether. The little one, Lily, would inch away if I sat next to her. I overheard Trinell whisper to her once, "She's not bad, sweetie. She's just not like us." Not like us. I replayed that line over and over. I wanted to ask, in what way? But I already knew the answer. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. I didn't defer. I wasn't soft-spoken and agreeable. I worked too much. I talked too little. I stayed late. I said no. They didn't know how to name those things without making them wrong. So they made me wrong. I started waking up earlier, leaving the house before the kids were up. I worked longer hours. I told Charlene I had client calls at night, so I didn't need dinner. Sometimes I parked near the grocery store and just sat with a sandwich in my car, watching families load their trunks with the week's meals. Eventually, I stopped coming home at all. I found an overnight gym that let me shower. I kept a duffel bag with me and charged my phone in the car using a power bank. On weekends, I'd find shaded parking lots and try to sleep with one eye open. It wasn't sustainable, but it was quieter than pretending to be part of a family that barely acknowledged I existed. A week after I stopped showing up, I came back one night just to grab some winter clothes. The lights were off. I still had my key, but when I turned it in the lock, it didn't fit. At first, I thought I was just tired. I tried again. Slowly, deliberately. The key wouldn't turn. They'd changed the locks. No warning, no call, no explanation. I stood there, in front of the door I helped pay for, listening to the muffled buzz of the fridge inside, the sound of a life I'd been edited out of. I walked around the side of the house, tried the garage. Also locked. No note. No bag left outside. Just a silent confirmation that I'd been dismissed without ceremony. The next morning, I went back and left a sticky note on the mailbox. I didn't expect anyone to read it. I just needed it to be said, somewhere, out loud. I'll be out of the way. I always was. No one replied. No one asked where I'd gone. The morning after I left that sticky note, I parked across from the county clerk's office and stared at the building like it owed me something. Maybe it did. Or maybe I just needed it to be the one place in town where I still existed on paper. I had a folder in the passenger seat, thick with receipts, printouts, timestamps, emails, contractor quotes, all in my name. I'd spent the better part of 2 weeks pulling it together at night from my car, with a borrowed portable hotspot and public Wi-Fi. The printer at OfficeMax had jammed 3 times, but by the end, I had enough to show a judge I wasn't just squatting in a story someone else wrote. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't looking to burn the house down, at least not literally. I just wanted my name put back where it belonged, on the title. The lady behind the filing counter didn't flinch when she asked, "Filing Pro SC or do you have representation?" "Pro C," I said, and she nodded like she'd seen it 100 times that week. She probably had. People lose things quietly every day in places like this. I wasn't special. Still, I left that office feeling taller. Maybe because it was the first decision I'd made in months that hadn't been for someone else's comfort. The paperwork was stamped and scanned. I had a case number now. I had leverage. For once, I wasn't asking anyone to believe me. I had proof. Weeks passed with no response, until one arrived in a standard white envelope, stamped and sealed, marked opposition response. Inside was a typed statement and legal summary from the defense. And at the bottom, a signature, Devereux Hall. My breath caught. I hadn't said that name out loud in years. We'd met back in undergrad, debate team. He was whip-smart, always composed. We never dated, not really, but we danced around it. Shared late-night study sessions, called each other just to talk, drifted into long silences that always hinted at something more. I had liked him, genuinely, and now, he was their attorney, their legal shield, their mouthpiece. I stared at the signature for longer than I care to admit. Then I snapped a photo of it and sent it to an old friend with a single line. "Guess I'm the villain in their version of the story." To be honest, I didn't know what hurt more, that he was defending them, or that he hadn't even warned me. Our hearing date was set. I prepared like it was a full-time job. I practiced my statements, highlighted the documents, reprinted copies. I even color-coded the binder. I told myself it was about being organized, but really I needed to feel competent again. I needed some kind of order after months of being erased. The morning of the hearing, I got there 15 minutes early. The courtroom was cold, the fluorescent lighting harsh against the wooden benches. I sat in the second row, behind the plaintiff's table, flipping through my tabs as if anyone else in the room was watching. He walked in 3 minutes before the judge. Same calm stride, same pressed collar, same way he carried a conversation with just his presence. He saw me and looked away. I didn't wave, I didn't smile. I just sat still. He didn't approach. No nod, no gesture, nothing. This wasn't college. This wasn't flirting in libraries or quoting case law over late-night coffee. This was real. This was my home on the line. This was them calling me a squatter in the house I bought. The judge asked if I had representation. I stood. "I'm representing myself, Your Honor." My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed too much for that. Devereux presented the motion to dismiss. It was standard stuff. Claims of miscommunication. No clear proof of financial contribution. The assertion that I'd voluntarily vacated the property. I handed the judge copies of my bank transfers, the inspection report in my name, the initial down payment sent from my account, the email chain with the realtor, the original loan approval before Charlene convinced me to use Marvin's name for now. The judge reviewed it carefully. Silent. Devereux didn't object. He didn't argue much. Maybe because the evidence spoke louder than he could. Maybe because he knew me well enough to recognize I wouldn't have shown up unless I had the receipts. After the hearing, I stepped into the hallway. My body finally let go of the tension it had been holding for hours. I leaned against the wall, taking in deep breaths like I'd just finished a long run. Devereux came out minutes later. He glanced at me, nodded politely, and kept walking. I didn't stop him. We weren't those people anymore. And I wasn't there to reconnect. I was there to win. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like paper and carpet glue, familiar in a way that didn't comfort. I stood there, binder still in hand, heart not racing anymore, but not entirely steady either. I knew what I'd brought to the table. I knew the numbers matched, but I also knew my last name didn't carry the weight theirs did in that town. 2 weeks passed before the next hearing was scheduled. I filled the time with more paperwork, cross-referencing dates, copying statements, checking timestamps until my eyes blurred. Every night, I reviewed the facts like scripture. Not because I thought the truth would be enough, but because I had nothing else to rely on. When the date finally arrived, I wore the same blazer as last time. It wasn't about style. It was about control. A small routine in a storm of variables. The courtroom looked the same. So did Charlene, perched beside Delmar, like she was attending a family brunch rather than a legal proceeding. Trinell was behind them, her phone in her hand, tapping the screen like her attention was too expensive for any of this. The bailiff called us in. I stood, steady. Devereux didn't greet me. He looked down at his notes as if I were another appointment on his calendar. That was fine. I wasn't here for pleasantries. The judge entered, glasses low on her nose, tone clipped and businesslike. "We'll be reviewing supplemental documentation from the plaintiff today." I nodded, stepped forward, and handed over a small stack. "These are digital receipts from the initial wire transfer, Your Honor, including the purchase deposit, loan inspection fee, and title insurance, all paid from my account. You'll also find the email thread with the original realtor, confirming my approval and communication history." She took them, flipping through each page with methodical precision. Her brow didn't move, but her focus deepened. "And the scanned deed submitted by the defense?" she asked. Devereux passed it over. She placed both documents side by side. Then, slowly, she turned to me. "Miss Venetra." "Yes, Miss Venetra. Are you stating this signature isn't yours?" "It is not." She nodded again. "Any indication of forgery?" "There are inconsistencies in the alignment. Also, the spacing in the last name. Mine is usually tight. This one stretches unnaturally. The date doesn't match the bank transaction. And this version doesn't match my verified e-signature on the lender's portal. It was the most technical I had sounded in months, and for once, I didn't shrink from it. Silence settled in the courtroom, the kind that stretches a little too long, like everyone's holding a breath they don't know they took. Then a voice from the gallery cut through. Excuse me, Your Honor." Everyone turned. Even the judge paused. There, standing near the back pew, was Mrs. Ebba. Gray curls pinned back, clutching her large brown purse with both hands, spine straight, despite the tremor in her voice. "I'm sorry to speak out like this, but I've lived across the street for 17 years. I watched this young woman paint that porch herself. I watched her carry in every box when she moved in, and I watched her sleep in her car after they changed the locks." Gasps rippled. Not dramatic, but enough. Charlene didn't turn. Delmar looked down. Mrs. Ebba took a breath and added, "I told them it wasn't right. I told them. But they said it was family business, and that I should mind mine." The judge raised her hand gently. "Ma'am, I appreciate your input. We'll take your statement under advisement." Ebba nodded, sat back down, and didn't speak again, but her words hovered like incense. The rest of the hearing was procedural. Devereux tried to regain footing, but it didn't land the same. The judge requested time to review all new submissions. No ruling yet. But I didn't need one. The air had changed. As we filed out, I didn't look at Charlene or Delmar. I didn't need to. For the first time, they weren't looking at me either. Not in that smug, dismissive way. Not like they held the upper hand. Outside, I didn't celebrate. There were no fist pumps or deep exhales. But something shifted. The lie had cracked. The silence had been broken by someone who had nothing to gain and no reason to stand with me, except that she knew the truth. It wasn't just a small win. It was a correction, a rearranging of balance that had been tilted too long. I didn't need the judge's gavel that day to feel the scales start tipping back toward me. After the hearing, I kept my head down. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't even decompressing. Something in me knew they weren't finished. Not because they had more to say, but because they'd lost control. And people like Charlene don't sit quietly after losing control. 7 days later, I got a packet in the mail. Legal letterhead. Inside was a new affidavit submitted by my mother, my own mother, claiming I had a pattern of emotional instability. It referenced vague therapy sessions, concerns for the children's safety, and my alleged erratic behavior during the time I lived at the house. Buried in the attached statements was Delmar's note. She once locked herself in the garage screaming for hours. I hadn't. What happened that day was simple. I had just gotten off a client call, was heading into the house, and realized they had thrown out my work notebooks, boxes I kept stacked neatly in the garage. Notes, ideas, contracts, printed drafts, months of effort. I sat in the driver's seat and cried, quietly, for maybe 10 minutes. The garage door was down. No one saw me. Apparently, in their version, that made me unstable. Then there was Trinell's addition. "The girls had nightmares," she wrote. "They didn't feel safe when she was around." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I took a breath, picked up my coffee, and logged back into my work portal like nothing had happened. That night, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, opened my laptop, and scrolled through my old therapy records. I'd asked for copies the previous year, back when I thought I might try switching providers. I found them all, PDFs downloaded and archived. Not one mentioned any history of instability. There were notes about fatigue, stress, being overworked. One session from the middle of the pandemic read, "Client shows signs of burnout from work-family tension. No indication of delusional thinking or mood dysregulation." I printed it, all of it. I wasn't going to argue with their narrative. I was going to dismantle it. The courthouse was closed that weekend, so I took a detour that Sunday and stopped by St. Matthew's, a small brick church that still smelled like hymnals and old wood polish. I didn't plan to sit through service. I just wanted the quiet the kind of stillness you can only get in a building where people ask the sky for help. I walked through the side door and slid into the back row. Charlene was already there. She was alone, her purse beside her, her hands clasped as if praying, but her eyes were open and unfocused, like she wasn't sure who she was talking to. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She knew I was there. Mothers always know. For a few minutes, we sat in silence. A fan buzzed softly near the organ. Outside, a bird chirped like it hadn't gotten the memo about the tension inside. Then, without turning to me, she whispered, "I didn't think it would go this far." I didn't respond. She continued, "You always pushed too hard. You never let me protect you the way I knew how." I wanted to ask, protect me from what? Owning my own house? Being seen? But I didn't. I let her speak. "You've always made things harder than they had to be," she said, softer now. "Delmar, he's not built for struggle. He's fragile, even if he doesn't show it." That word, fragile, hung in the air like a smoke alarm no one bothered to shut off. And me? I wasn't fragile, so I didn't deserve protection? Or maybe it was easier for them to assume I could carry the weight, so they kept stacking it on. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't cry. I didn't reach for her hand like a daughter desperate for reconciliation. But I didn't leave either. Because sometimes the deepest form of strength isn't walking away. It's choosing not to run when every part of you wants to disappear. She never apologized. She never admitted anything. But the way her voice cracked on the last line, "I just didn't want to lose both of you," told me more than I expected. For the first time, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman who'd built her whole identity around managing perception. And I was the part she couldn't control. That made me dangerous. That made me wrong. That made me free. I left the church that day with a strange calm. It wasn't peace. Not quite. More like the awareness that a storm had passed, and I was still standing, wet, windblown, but intact. I didn't rush home. I didn't call anyone. I drove the long way, past familiar streets and corner stores that no longer whispered reminders of who I used to be. That night, as I made tea in the tiny kitchenette of my rented apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. The text was short. "You'll want to see this." Beneath it, a video file. I hesitated before hitting play. It opened on a shaky clip from someone's backyard. Delmar's voice unmistakable over the hum of music and beer-fueled laughter. "I mean, come on," he slurred. "Y'all know that house was never really mine. It's my sister's. But Mom said we'd handle it. You know, legally." There were a few chuckles off camera. Delmar kept going. "She didn't even fight it at first. That's the thing. She just handed it over. Who does that?" Then someone else piped up. "She sounds like a fool." Delmar raised his red plastic cup. "A quiet fool, but still a fool." That word, fool, sat in my chest like a rock. I didn't replay the clip. I didn't need to. The words were already etched into memory. Apparently, one of Delmar's friends had shared it in a private group, trying to be funny. But by morning, it had spread. Local Facebook pages, church group chats, even someone from my high school messaged me, "Is this real?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. By noon, the video had over 20,000 views. There was no context needed. He said it. Clearly, repeatedly. And no one cut him off. No one in the background said, "That's not true." They just laughed. Comments poured in. She always struck me as the responsible one. I remember her mowing that lawn in 110-degree heat while Delmar sat in the garage drinking. I always wondered how he got that house. I didn't post anything. I didn't even like or share the video. I let it live its own life, an accidental truth finally unleashed. The court date was already on the calendar. 2 days later, I walked into that courtroom with nothing new in my hands. No new documents, no rebuttals, just presence. Delmar was already seated, suit wrinkled, face pale. Charlene didn't meet my eyes. Trinell was absent. Devereaux looked tired. The judge asked if either side had new evidence. I simply said, "The court may have already seen it circulating." She blinked. "Are you referring to the video currently under public circulation?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you confirm the voice in the video belongs to Mr. Delmar?" "Yes." The judge turned to Devereaux. "Does your client deny making the statements?" He hesitated. "No, Your Honor." The air shifted again, sharper this time, like a final thread had snapped. The judge leaned back. "Then we'll consider the statements in context with the existing evidence, unless the defense has further explanation?" Silence. Charlene folded her hands in her lap. Delmar stared straight ahead. The hearing ended quietly. No shouting, no grand reveal. Just the sound of gavel wood tapping once against the bench. Deliberation would take place within the week. Outside on the courthouse steps, a reporter hovered near the exit. I walked past them. I didn't need to be quoted. I'd been invisible long enough to know how to leave a room without a sound. Later that evening, as the sun tucked itself behind the horizon and the cicadas started their nightly chorus, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea and nothing left to prove. I'd said nothing in court. I hadn't shouted or accused. I hadn't needed to. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It whispers. And when it does, it's enough to crumble even the loudest lie. 2 weeks had passed since the clip went viral. 2 weeks since the courtroom fell silent, not because I yelled, but because they'd exposed themselves, on tape, in front of the whole town, and most unforgivably, in front of me. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I just lived. On that particular Saturday, I was making coffee. It was just past 10. The light from the small kitchen window painted long shadows across the tile floor of my apartment. I was scrolling through work emails when I heard the knock. Not hurried, not frantic, just hesitant. I paused. No one ever knocked on my door. I didn't host people. I barely answered unknown calls. I walked slowly to the peephole, and there they were. Charlene, standing in a pressed floral blouse she probably hadn't worn since Easter, holding a slim manila folder close to her chest, like it might keep her from collapsing. Behind her, Delmar looked like a man who'd forgotten how to stand up straight. His hair was unkempt. He held Lily, asleep in his arms, with the kind of grip you see on men who've lost too many things already. I opened the door halfway. Charlene cleared her throat. "We just need a little help. It's temporary, until we get back on our feet." No greeting, no apology. Straight to the ask. I didn't say anything right away. I looked at the two of them, one person who raised me, another who replaced me, and I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. "May we come in?" she added, voice lower now. I stepped out onto the threshold, gently pulling the door so it blocked half my body. It was subtle, but the message was clear. "Help with what?" I asked. Delmar didn't speak. Charlene tried. "The house is in dispute. Your father's pension fund is frozen pending legal review. And Delmar..." She looked back at him. "He's on unpaid leave." I nodded slowly. "So, what exactly are you asking for?" "A place to stay, just for a while. A month, maybe 2. I looked around, not at them, but at my surroundings. The rust-colored bricks of the apartment complex, the creaking mailbox by the gate, the sound of a neighbor's dog barking 2 doors down. "Why here?" Charlene blinked. "Because you're the only one who still has something." There it was. Not because we trust you, not because we're sorry, just, you still have something. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said calmly, "if that's what you're afraid of." Charlene started to speak, but I cut her off with a small hand gesture. "Not aggressive, just decisive. But I also don't owe you refuge." Delmar shifted Lily in his arms. She stirred, whimpered softly, then fell quiet again. I looked at the little girl for a long moment. She didn't choose this. None of the kids did. I turned back to Charlene. "You told people I was unstable, that I wasn't safe to be around children. But now you're here,
with a child in tow, asking for help. She had the decency to lower her eyes. I continued, "Do you see how that makes you look?" Charlene nodded slowly. I stepped back and said, "No." That was it. No drawn-out monologue, no grand declarations, just one word. I closed the door, gently, not in anger, but in clarity. Inside, I stood for a second with my hand still on the knob. I didn't shake. I didn't weep. I didn't gloat. I exhaled. Then I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself the rest of the coffee, and opened my laptop. I had emails to answer. The afternoon passed without drama. I watered my plants, folded laundry, listened to a podcast. There was no applause, no invisible crowd cheering, but I moved through my day with something I hadn't felt in years: quiet dignity. Later that evening, I received a message from my attorney. He'd drawn up a full motion to press charges for fraud and request damages. He included a projected outcome if I pursued full restitution, liquidation of all assets, possible liens, and a formal investigation into the forged signature. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Don't file it." 5 minutes later, he replied, "Are you sure?" I was. "Winning doesn't mean becoming them," I typed. I shut the laptop and opened the window. The breeze carried in a faint scent of cut grass from the maintenance crew that came every Saturday. I poured a glass of iced tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the fading sun. There was no victory banner, just peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. I was choosing myself. Fall had crept in quietly. The morning air was cooler now, the kind that made you keep the windows down but the heater on low. I waited until late afternoon, when the sun began to slide behind the trees, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk leading up to the house I once called home. It was mine again. The paperwork had gone through without much fanfare. No one from the other side contested the final decision. Maybe they were too tired. Maybe they finally understood they had nothing left to pull. The house had returned to its rightful owner, but I wasn't there to stay. I parked by the curb and sat in the car for a few minutes, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered. The trees taller, the mailbox rusted. Time had moved, even when some people hadn't. I walked up the path slowly, key in hand. I hadn't used it in nearly a year. The door opened easier than I expected. The inside was stripped of personality. No toys scattered. No voices. No smell of cornbread or cheap air freshener. Just the echo of footsteps on wood floors and the faint hum of the refrigerator still ticking in the background. I wasn't there to reclaim anything. I came for closure. I moved through the rooms deliberately. The living room still had the small scuff mark on the wall from where I once tried to hang a mirror that was too heavy. The second bedroom, the one I was eventually given before I was pushed out, still had a tiny crack in the corner of the ceiling from a roof leak no one fixed. In the kitchen, I found a half-empty drawer filled with mismatched silverware. Behind the microwave, still stuck with yellowed tape, was one of Charlene's old recipe cards. Her handwriting was smaller now than I remembered. Neater. She always prided herself on being proper. I took nothing. Not the chipped mug that used to be mine. Not the stained oven mitt that somehow made it through 3 sets of tenants. Not even the framed photo of all of us at the 4th of July cookout the year before it all unraveled. I came for one box. The one they'd boxed up and shoved into a back closet when they'd moved me out, temporarily. Inside were 3 books I'd forgotten I owned, an old planner still marked with sticky notes, and a broken lamp I never got around to fixing. I carried the box to the kitchen counter and set it down. Then I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a final blow. It was just the truth. I laid the paper flat on the counter. I didn't seal it. I didn't sign it. There was no need. It read, "I didn't win. I didn't lose. I endured. This house was mine when no one believed I deserved one. I won't return. But I will never erase myself again." I didn't look around one more time. I didn't linger in the doorway for some imagined swell of emotion. I didn't expect violins or epiphanies. I just walked out. As I reached my car, I looked up at the roofline, that familiar overhang I once painted by hand in 100-degree heat. I remembered how proud I was when it dried smooth and clean, how I used to stand back and admire the small things I did for myself. That feeling didn't rush back, but something like it flickered. I drove slowly through the neighborhood, passing landmarks that once held weight. The church where Charlene whispered her half-confession, the mailbox where I left that sticky note, the laundromat where I spent too many nights sleeping upright. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't nostalgic either. Some places are just markers, proof that you survived walking through them. I stopped at a red light near the highway on-ramp, leaned back in the seat, and whispered, "That chapter's closed." The light turned green. I didn't speed up. I drove steady. Back home, I slid the box onto the floor by the hallway closet and went to wash my hands. The sun had set completely now. The kitchen felt cool and quiet. I opened the window, letting in the air without hesitation. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside of something I built. This wasn't about property. It never was. It was about finally being able to say, out loud and without fear, I was here.